I'd be pretty pumped if we were able to get the Dookie here in New Orleans. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be great. I don't know about calling him the Dookie because that has other connotations.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichet. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a great rating on iTunes. We have a lot to cover today. The Pelicans' new president of basketball operations / GM, they hired David Griffin. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk NBA playoffs and NBA MVP race. We're also going to dive into the NFL draft. But before we do all that, I do have to give a little shout out to Michael here, who just passed his actuary test. Michael, let's play coach here. Kind of talk about your preparation going into the exam, and tell us how you feel about your accomplishment.
I feel pretty good. They're pretty nerve-wracking. So it was the fourth of 7 tests, and so each test you're supposed to study about 300 hours, and I try to get there, but honestly, I typically don't for each sitting. But just discipline, and I don't know. I think I'm a player getting interviewed right now. But, yeah.
It turns out it's hard to give one of those formulaic answers after all.
It was sticking to the game plan. Yeah, I feel like, we had a good thing in mind. Yeah, something like that. But, my voice cracked a little bit there. But that'll tell you how prepared I am to answer that question.
No, we're all very, very happy that you're able to pass the test and move on to bigger and better things in the ultimate quest to become an actuary. But let's move on to the Big Easy Sports Talk story of the week, and that is the Pelicans hiring new GM / president of basketball operations, whatever you want to call them. What are your initial thoughts on this hire?
I'm happy about it. I think because we'd actually covered Griffin very, very early on, because right after all that stuff went down with Dell, Griffin was one of the first names that was put out there. So I always thought that Griffin did a really good job when he was in Cleveland. He's very well regarded in the NBA circles. And I think what's most interesting to me is that right about the time that we hired him was about when all that stuff was going down with the Lakers. So Magic Johnson stepped down, and it just honestly, I'm trying to think about an appropriate word to use besides shit show for the Lakers. But they just don't have it together. And I honestly, I don't know what other word I'd use for it, because for years now, they've really struggled to make themselves into something not laughable. They've really struggled. And it's funny to me that in that market, you have LeBron James. And I don't know if Griffin was the first on their list or anything like that, but just the proximity of everything that went down with Magic stepping down and then Griffin being hired for the Pels, I thought was interesting. So I'm excited.
What has Griffin done in the past to give Pelicans fans optimism about the future?
I think one of the biggest things is he actually had a number 1 pick to trade. So he had Wiggins to trade when he was trying to put together a team for LeBron to win a title. So he was the one that went out and got love for Wiggins. I think given the position he was in, I think he really did a great job with everything. And I think he's sitting on a winning lottery ticket in Davis, and I really am glad that someone who already was put in a very difficult position to make that kind of trade, to put together a championship team for LeBron a second time around, I think given that pressure that he's been through, I think it's going to be a really, really smooth thing for the Pelicans to have someone like that.
So he has a championship ring, is that right?
He put together that team. So yeah, I mean.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I didn't know that. And that's something that's good. And here, like you said, there are a couple challenges that he has. I noticed, obviously, there's that New Orleans is kind of a smaller basketball market, of course. But the challenges of getting the right decision for AD. And also, he has the 7th best odds in this year's lottery. So kind of talk about what you expect out of Griffin going into this offseason.
Okay, so the odds are their own thing, right? So they actually split the odds between us, Memphis, and Dallas in terms of the top 4 picks, and then also for the number. So each individual pick in that range. What's a little bit different though is we get the tiebreaker, so any extra odds that are not divisible are allocated to us. But then the biggest thing is that once the lottery, again, for people who are not familiar with the lottery is actually only done for the first 4 picks. So once the 4 picks are set, what happens is the teams are set in the reverse order of the standings. So because we have that tiebreaker, if Memphis and
That's awesome.
if Memphis and Dallas don't jump us and get lottery picks, well, let's just pretend like we don't get a lottery pick. So we would be the 7th team. Now, if someone jumps us from behind us, then we would be 8th, and then if it's 2 teams that jump us, we'd be 9th, etc. But that affects things. I mean, that's the 2-spot swing right there that we avoided by getting that flip of the coin, which is it's great. That's awesome.
And what are our actual set odds of getting the number 1 overall pick now?
So the number 1 overall pick is going to be about 6%. A top 4 is about 26%, so slightly over 1 and 4. And as far as your Griffin question, I mean, the biggest thing is going to be, well, so first of all, that Memphis pick, which makes this really interesting, right? So not only did we wind up getting better odds than Memphis and Dallas in terms of like we have a slightly different chance for the top 4. That's not really a whole difference there. But in terms of getting number 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever, we have a much better chance because we're going to be in front of them as long as they don't jump us in the lottery. What happens is Memphis is actually top 8 protected. So if Memphis goes below pick 8, then they actually exchange that pick to the Celtics. So, and because the Celtics are, at least to my knowledge, going to have the best bid for Davis, that actually impacts what they can trade us. So it was kind of like a double win in my opinion.
And right now, you're still thinking it's most likely that we're going to get a deal done with the Celtics, or do you have other teams in mind right now?
I think it depends on who wins the lottery. I think if everything stays as it is today, depending on whether or not New York is going to get that first pick, I think that the Celtics at this moment, considering that let's pretend that no one else gets that first pick that is going to actually trade us, then I think the Celtics definitely have the best package. I think if New York gets the first pick, I think that there's a very strong chance that they would at least entertain trading for Davis. I think if Chicago did, I think they would think about it. I think that if the Lakers do, if the Lakers get that pick, again, very low odds. I don't think that's going to happen. But if the Lakers got it, I think Davis would be off that. I think he'd be on that roster immediately. We talked about that last podcast. So we actually have a decent chance of getting that number 1 pick, given that there are other teams that could possibly trade for Davis, and that a couple of them have pretty good chances.
How does Davis's value stack up with Zion Williamson just as an asset? Because there's a lot of situations right now, or a lot of teams I would think that would be interested in doing the Zion for Davis trade straight up. Like, for example, if the Lakers got the number 1 overall pick, I do think that they would ultimately trade Zion to, the rights to the number 1 overall pick, I should say, to the Pelicans for Anthony Davis. Other teams aren't necessarily trying to win now like the Lakers are with LeBron James in kind of a closing window. Some of these teams are trying to build for the future. Is it conceivable that if certain teams ended up with the number 1 overall pick, that they would not trade it for Anthony Davis straight up?
It depends on how you can capitalize afterwards. So, I mean, if you look at someone like New York, where there's some rumors that Durant or Kyrie Irving or maybe someone else could possibly go there, in those situations, if you can get Davis and you can land another star, it's way more conceivable than, let's just say, someone like Cleveland. That I don't think Davis would be staying in Cleveland long term if they got the number 1 pick and they traded for him, or even if they didn't get the number 1 pick or they got that number 2 pick or 3 or whatever. I think you have to look at the ability of the team to immediately build at least a playoff caliber team and something enough to where Davis would want to stay long term. So I think you're not even just looking at the team value. You're actually looking at, okay, like what kind of risk profile does the owner have? Is it something that the owner's just trying to make money? Is it something to where the owner's going to consider, are they willing to be spending into the Lux tax? Like, there are all kinds of questions to be asking, I think, when you're looking at this. And there are certain teams, like you're saying, where New York, a big market, I think they would absolutely take that chance on Davis. And I think that's what you have to look at.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just really interesting because I do think that there's a better than I'll say the public probably has a certain perception on how likely it is that we end up with a guy like Zion Williamson. And it's not just 6%. Like a lot of these teams we could actually trade AD with, that actually improves our odds of getting Zion Williamson big time. And I'd be pretty pumped if we were able to get the Dookie here in New Orleans. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah, it'd be great. I don't know about calling him the Dookie because that has other connotations. But no, I definitely think it's cool that we can consider it's not just like you're saying the 6%. Like, let's just pretend that New York is a certainty. So then we'd be adding basically 14% to the odds that we would get someone like Zion, and that'd be amazing. And it's not a bad time to be sitting on Davis when, again, he's a top 5, top 10 NBA player. And you're basically sitting on him, and you can trade him at least to several of these destinations. I think it's a really good opportunity for the Pelicans to rebuild.
And that's going to be one of the many challenges, or I guess I should say optimistically, it's going to be one of the many opportunities that David Griffin has here. And I'm sure that that's what everyone's really going to be judging him on. That's his Andrew Wiggins and Kevin Love situation. He's sitting on potential gold mine here, and what he does with Anthony Davis is going to really determine his legacy and his future here for the Pelicans. So I'm kind of excited to get new management at this time. I'm excited to see where the Pelicans are going, and I really obviously want to land Zion Williamson. I think that would be awesome. But even if we end up going back to the original deal with the Celtics and we get Jason Tatum and maybe a pick or two else, that's also exciting too. Ultimately, you want to end up with someone that you think is going to be a future star, whether it's going to be Zion, Jason Tatum, or someone we haven't talked about. I think you have to come away with it having, a future star and not just picks with the chance to be a future star. You want something more sure thing. This isn't to say that Zion Williamson and Jason Tatum are sure things, but they're about as sure as you can get in terms of, projecting the draft, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to the question of what Zion could be in the NBA. I think he's going to be, at the worst, a very, very good player. So, maybe a top 25, top 30 player. That's his floor. And I'm not saying that again, I think he's probably the best, most sure prospect we've had since Davis. That doesn't mean he's going to be the best player. That doesn't mean he's going to be the top 2 or 3 player. But at the least, you'd be drafting someone who I can't imagine him not being a strong impact player at some point of his career, and at the worst a semi-star. I think he'll be a star. So it's one of those things where, like you're saying, we're just looking for someone like that, and whether that's Tatum or Zion, those are both very, very strong possibilities. I think that we're getting exactly what we want, which is a star. So I mean, you're always playing probability.
Yeah, and Zion's just so athletic, and he just looks the part. He passes the eye test, and he's just also really physical. I mean, he just goes after those rebounds, with a lot of force, and he plays with a lot of anger. So I really want the Pelicans to be able to get him. But even somebody like Ja Morant would be really good, and Jason Tatum obviously really good too. It's going to be really interesting this summer. I know you're excited for it, and I know a lot of Pelicans fans are kind of excited to move on from Anthony Davis. And I think Anthony Davis is also excited to move on from us. Michael, he wore a shirt. It was a Looney Tunes shirt, which I can respect because, I've always been a fan of Space Jam and everything like that. But on his final game with the New Orleans Pelicans, he wore a shirt that, a lot of the big-time Pelicans fans didn't appreciate, I would say. It said, "That's all, folks," kind of just in that Looney Tunes font that you kind of see. If you watch cartoons growing up, it's in that exact same font. Now, he claims that somebody else, some kind of stylist or someone, or his agent, or I don't know, not his agent. I'm not going to blame his agent. I'm too busy always blaming his agent. It's just natural. But some stylist kind of picked it out, and they put his shirt on his bed or whatever in his locker room and wherever he is getting dressed, and he just wears it. And that's what he claimed that it was, and he's always liked Looney Tunes. He kind of didn't really have a good excuse for it, but what were your thoughts on that?
I think that he didn't have a good excuse for it. That whole thing, yeah. I mean, come on, man. I'm not, look, again, I don't fault Davis for wanting to leave, but, why when you're leaving would you do something that dumb? I mean, there's no, he asked to be out of here. Is he surprised that he's gotten some negative feedback. I just to wear that shirt, whether he picked it out or someone else. Zach Lowe and I can't remember who was on his podcast. I think it was a Brooklyn Nets guy. We're having a field day with it, and like, hey, did you pick out your own shirt today? Are you a grown man? And I thought it was great. I just like, come on, grow up, man. I don't blame him again, but dude, like, yeah.
The pettiness level in New Orleans sports, just with the Nola no call and, the Goodell clown shirts and Drew Brees actually just had a spot on TV with his Untuck It brand where he kind of mentions the Nola no call subtly. And then all the floats during Mardi Gras in the blind refs hanging by cars. The pettiness level in New Orleans sports right now is maybe Anthony Davis just kind of caught wind of that. But I do think that he absolutely had to buy or custom make this shirt, right? You can't just buy a Looney Tunes shirt. I think he had to actually custom make this shirt, kind of planning for this moment here. So, no, I don't think it was an accident by any means, as he's claiming. And, hey, it's just one of those things where when you leave nowadays and you're a star and you're leaving, it's almost like, you're going to upset people, but it almost seems like now almost every star who leaves a destination after a while kind of goes out with some kind of animosity or revenge factor going on there. And it's just kind of sad to see. You're not really seeing these players just kind of go out quietly into the night anymore and go on a new team and everything's cool, But anyway, I digress. Let's move on to the next topic of the day, and that's the NBA playoffs. Michael, it's a great time of year for sports right now. The NCAA March Madness tournament just ended, and that was an incredible tournament. I mean, the national championship game was in overtime. I mean, that was just a great tournament all around. Not a lot of upsets, but just a ton of close games, especially in the Elite Eight. And then we had the Masters this weekend where Tiger Woods just won his first major today as of this recording, and that was awesome to watch. And then now we have the NHL playoffs. I love playoff hockey, very underrated sporting events there, and NBA playoffs are also starting. And let's talk NBA playoffs. We saw 3 upsets on day 1 of the NBA postseason. The number 2 seed Denver Nuggets lost to the 7 seed Spurs. The number 6 seed Brooklyn Nets defeated the number 3 seed 76ers, and that was with Embiid playing, although he was a little hurt in that game. And number 7 seed Orlando Magic. This was a really surprising one. They upset the number 2 seed Toronto Raptors. So 3 upsets out of the 4 games. Of course, the Warriors being the one that didn't get upset in day 1. But I digress. Michael, which one of these underdogs who are up 1-0 right now has the best chance of actually winning the series? The Spurs, the Nets, or the Magic?
I think that depends on how healthy Embiid is, but ultimately I would still say I think the Spurs have a really good chance. I think they match up really well with Denver. I think it's something to where I really value experience, and obviously Denver has had an incredible season. They weren't that far away from getting the number 1 seed in the West. I think, but it's hard to, when you have a bunch of young players who don't have a lot of playoff experience, and you're facing someone like the Spurs who have a decent bit of playoff experience. They also have just an incredible coach in Popovich. I think that's just a whole lot to get over. And I think ultimately, I think San Antonio is going to wind up winning that series. Actually, not only do I think that the most likely of the 3 teams that you mentioned, I actually would think it'd be more likely than not that the Spurs do win that series.
Wow. Yeah, and I know being up 1-0 is already, I mean, that's a big advantage, of course, especially when you can steal one on the road like that. But that's, I think it's pretty bold to say, actually, that it's more likely than not to have the Spurs winning. But, Greg Popovich, you're deferring to great coaching in the playoffs, and I can kind of see where you're coming from there, that the Nuggets don't really seem like they have a bunch of talented players, and I would even say they're pretty deep too, but they don't seem like they really play all that well together. Some nights they have these amazing offensive outputs, but I just don't know if they have the playoff grit, if you will. What are some of the things that you kind of see in the playoffs that are different from the regular season? I think a lot of people obviously say, oh, well, they play defense in the playoffs, but is it really that simple?
It's not that simple, but there is something to saying that. So, I mean, one, most of the teams that are playing in the NBA playoffs are at least top half defenses. So the worst two, so I always go off cleaning the glass statistics because they exclude garbage time and sort of things that you shouldn't be counting in terms of defensive efficiency. But if you're looking at the top defenses, so the worst one in the playoffs is the Clippers at 21, then the Spurs at 20. But I mean, most of those teams are well into the top half. So when you're playing a team in the regular season, you're playing all kinds of defenses, good ones, bad ones, etc. But when you're playing in the NBA playoffs, not only are you playing most of the top defenses, but you're also playing defenses that have a lot of time to game plan for you. Granted, you have a lot of time to game plan for them, but you're also playing, like you're saying, in a defensive environment that's much more intense. They can get away with more contact. So the defenses are better. They have more, leeway in how they play against you on defense. And they're also trying harder because it's the playoffs. Like, all those things coming together, you're talking about a very, very different kind of game. And I think you can look no further than last year when we played the Blazers, and you can see how someone as good as Damian Lillard can be completely shut out because their team didn't have enough playmakers. So, I mean, last year, we blitzed every pick and roll with Lillard. He's 6'2", 6'3", so you have these big guys, you're getting trapped on the pick and roll, and all of a sudden you're trying to pass out of it to other people who can't play make, and we dominated in that series. And Damian Lillard's a great player. Like, that's how different it is in the regular season versus the playoffs. Like, you can be getting into those kinds of situations, and he just didn't know what to do. Like, even his interviews, he was like, "Oh, look, I acknowledge the reality, but like, I got to figure it out." But I mean, it was really tough.
Right, and you have the refs definitely swallowing the whistle, for lack of better words, in the playoffs, where they're allowing teams to be more physical, and it really makes for a better brand of basketball, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and say that they're not trying during the regular season, but it's a very long regular season in the NBA playoff. I mean, in the NBA. And if you're a playoff caliber team and you're kind of making the playoffs, then there's no first round buys in the NBA playoffs. So seeding is only of so much importance. So, I can understand guys who are not necessarily taking a night off just for rest, but also not really going full strength all the time on every possession like you're seeing in the playoffs. And it makes a better brand of basketball. You kind of see the same exact thing in the NHL with the hockey playoffs, where it's just the refs are swallowing the whistle. It's more contact. It's more physical. It's more fun to watch.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what you're saying is true. I don't blame players at all during the regular season for resting. I think that's a completely reasonable expectation. I think you're not trying to win every game. You're trying to exert, like, not to be a minimalist, but you're trying to exert the proper amount of effort to where, like you're saying, seeding it's not irrelevant in the NBA. It's certainly relevant, but mostly because of matchups, not because of the actual seed. Like, you're not getting a home field advantage. Like, you are getting a home court advantage. Yeah. So in that way, it's important because you want to be playing at home as much as possible.
Only for one game.
Yeah, I mean, it does make a difference for, like, if you, especially, like, so someone like the Nuggets. So what was crazy about the Spurs winning is that the Nuggets actually had the best home record in the NBA. And they typically enjoy a really, really strong home advantage because of where they're playing, because they're playing in the mountains and other teams aren't used to it. But, I mean, like you're saying, it really is not quite like you're not getting buys and stuff like in other sports. So it is different. And I think you should always be looking to maximize your aggregate output, not your individual games. Yeah, so.
Right, and look at Joel Embiid for the 76ers.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a team that you could argue that's a perfect argument for what we're saying right now, because you could easily make the argument that the 76ers kind of played him too much during the regular season, and then now all of a sudden his knee issues are flaring up again at the worst possible time.
Right.
And I would argue that it's because they kind of played him too many minutes. I know Embiid's always kind of been a guy that you need to manage and monitor those minutes. But, I had Embiid on my fantasy team this year, and I was actually kind of expecting a lot more rested games than I got from him. Hey, that's great for me. I really enjoyed, him putting up stats for me and everything like that. But I was surprised a lot of nights, especially on back-to-backs in the middle of the regular season. It's like it was kind of surprising to me. I was like, wow, I'm actually surprised that he's going tonight. And he was questionable for a ton of games this year that he ended up playing. And it got to the point where it's like, I actually just stopped worrying about him, which is now, it's just kind of unfortunate for the 76ers that because you want your stars to be playing all the time, of course. And I respect the 76ers for not resting him in a sense, but it doesn't seem like the smartest move because now he's got knee issues at the worst possible time.
Yeah, I think I think that's a perfect example because you and I. So first of all, Nick beat me in the fantasy championship this year. He's being humble and not saying anything about it.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
But no, I mean, like it was exactly it. I was thinking the same thing when you drafted Embiid. I was like, well, he's going to have him for maybe 60 games this season. They're going to be resting him as much as they can, especially given that they probably have more playoff aspirations than they typically have had. I think it would be completely reasonable to rest him, almost any back-to-back. I think, and I think he would be in better shape.
Yeah, that was before they got Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler, too.
Yeah.
So, you could argue that they should even been resting him more with those, semi-superstars. So, I don't know. It's interesting, but the whole point is this: that I love seeing the defense and the more competitive nature in playoff basketball. I think it makes for a much more exciting game. And but before we go on to our next topic, Michael, I gotta get your NBA championship prediction. Is it anything other than the Warriors over the Bucks? Do you have any surprises for us potentially?
So I think we had talked a little bit earlier about the Bucks versus the Raptors because I always thought so. Again, net point differential is a huge deal. Giannis has been an absolute monster this year. I always err a little bit on the side of caution and skepticism in terms of teams making that leap to the final or something like that. I think Giannis is absolutely at the worst a top 3 player right now, and I think that it's going to be interesting to see how dominant he's going to be in the playoffs. So I think even though the Raptors did not grade out the same kind of point differential and nowhere near really than that the Bucks enjoyed this year, I still think there's a chance that the Raptors come out the East, and I think it's a pretty strong chance.
They're 0-1 right now,
yeah.
So they're in a little bit of a hole. They dropped one at home, but that's typical Toronto Raptors not showing up for the playoffs. You're not too worried about that.
Not yet. I mean, obviously that these things can change, but I would not going to sit here and say that I think it's a lock for the Raptors to make the finals, but I think that there's a strong possibility that it's either the Raptors or the Bucks. And I would actually lean towards the Raptors just because of experience. And I think especially someone like, they have Kawhi Leonard now this year, which is different.
Yeah, I was surprised they showed up flat with Kawhi. I thought he was going to be the difference, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. But I still have a lot of belief in them. I think they'll wind up figuring it out. And especially now, given that, I don't know. I just think it's a completely different game. I had nothing against DeRozan. DeRozan's a great player, but Kawhi's on a different level. And I think that's a big deal. And I think Danny Green's a big deal. I think Gasol, they really have a whole lot of experience, and I think they're going to wind up figuring it out.
Yeah, and I know the 76ers are so talented on paper, like their big four, and even with J.J. Redick, but they just it's just tough to trust them right now with Embiid playing hurt. And also, I just saw the splits the other day of when they don't have Embiid this year, they have a losing record, which is pretty surprising considering that they have Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, and Ben Simmons, and also, Redick and other role players. Pretty surprised. They have a losing record without Embiid, and they're obviously very good with Embiid. So it's just tough to trust the Sixers right now. So I do agree with you. I think that it's probably going to be Raptors and Bucks in the Eastern Conference Finals. But let's move on. Let's talk a little NFL draft here. And today we're going to do a little exercise here. We're going to this was brought about by our producer, Piano Man. He came up with this idea. Of course, we're going to get into, breaking down the entire draft, picks 1 through 32, mocking the draft later as the draft approaches. It's in a week and a half. But today, just to get a feel for things, we're going to do a little exercise. We have a mock draft here it's what's called a consensus mock draft, and it's from a ton of analysts. It's put together by BusinessInsider.com, and what they did was they made a composite with 9 NFL draft experts who mocked the draft, and they kind of made an average pick for each team. So Michael and I are going to kind of go through that today in series of 5s. And we'll just kind of talk about that. Michael, what are some of the things that you're kind of, you're looking at this mock draft right now. What are some of the things, before we get into it, what are some of the things you're kind of noticing or you're interested in?
I'm just interested to see like what kind of caliber the top. I'm always wanting to know what the top of the draft looks like versus a typical year. So like, I mean, we're not going to go back to the NBA, but sort of like you're always comparing those top players with what you would typically expect in a draft. So to me, I guess my question to you is like, if we're looking at the top 5 or top 10 of this year's draft, do you think that it's markedly better than a typical year? Do you think it's something to where it's pretty reasonably close, or like what are your general thoughts on the top of this draft?
Yeah, I mean, we'll start with the top 5 immediately. That's a great question. I think that you're seeing right about average. I think you have really the 3 best players in the draft are probably Kyler Murray, and this mock has him going to Arizona at number 1. That's something I agree with. And then Nick Bosa going to the 49ers. I also agree with that. I think those are the 2 best players in the draft. And then Quinnen Williams, they have them. This mock has the New York Jets at 3 taking him. I do think he's the 3rd best player in the draft, to be honest, but I personally don't have him at 3 yet. I think the Jets will be choosing between Josh Allen and Quinnen Williams. And, that's going to be one of the first big decisions that a lot of mockers this year have is who do you slot at the New York Jets who are looking to trade down, either Quinnen Williams or Josh Allen, and then who do you slot at the Oakland Raiders? And that flip, that could be the difference between, getting 2 picks right, which is actually, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're mocking the NFL draft, 2 picks is huge. So you do not want to miss on, that coin flip, if you will. And this draft also has Tampa Bay taking Devin White, which is something we've talked about for a while. I don't know if the Bucs will take him at 5. I think they'll consider Ed Oliver there. I think that they will, Ed Oliver doesn't even go until pick 14 in this draft, but I think that the Bucs will consider Ed Oliver there. I think that they'll consider Devin White, but if they take White, it's a little high for an inside linebacker. I wouldn't be surprised if they trade down a little, but overall, it's really tough. I think that what this draft does well is I think it does hit on the top 5 actual players of this draft, regardless of position. Kyler Murray, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams, defensive tackle for Alabama, Josh Allen, who's an edge defender for Kentucky, and Devin White, obviously the linebacker at LSU. I think those are the top 5 players in the draft, regardless of position.
Okay, so like going through 6 through 10, and I guess kind of continuing on from 1 through 5, what you're saying. I mean, do you feel like the tier ends at 5? Do you feel like there's like a clear delineation between those top 5 and the other ones? Like, where do you think it starts to kind of drop off a little bit?
That's an excellent question because I actually think it kind of drops off as the Oakland Raiders at 4, believe it or not. I think that after Josh Allen, there's kind of a drop off in terms of elite prospects. Hey, I think Devin White can be an elite linebacker in this league, and he might be one of the best linebackers in the NFL the moment he steps on the field. But just, Michael, you got to think about actual positional value here, and inside linebackers just typically aren't nearly as valuable as, a defensive lineman like Bosa or Josh Allen. So I do think that the Raiders at 4 are where the drop-off is. This mock has the Giants taking Dwayne Haskins at 6, which is something I strongly disagree with. I do not think the Giants are going to take Dwayne Haskins at 6. I'm actually surprised that the analysts who are pretty smart in this mock, they're including Mel Kiper and Todd McShay, Will Brinson of CBS, a couple guys from Bucky Brooks from NFL.com, John Clayton. These are all familiar names and respected names. I'm pretty surprised that at this late in the game that they have Dwayne Haskins going to 6 with the Giants. That's something I strongly disagree with. I do not think they're going to take a quarterback at 6, much more, I'll say, Dwayne Haskins. I don't think he really fits what they look for. Jaywan Taylor at 7, that's something I totally agree with. That's to Jacksonville. That's what I have mocked right now. I got to disagree with Rashawn Gary to Detroit at 8. That's not something – I think that's a little high for Rashawn Gary. I think the Lions are going to look to trade back. I see the hometown fit there with Michigan. He played at Michigan, and it is the Detroit Lions. But I think Gary is more athlete and less – and I'm sure you see it all the time, Michael, in the NBA draft. Like, you have these guys who are just raw athletes but not necessarily good – at their sport. Don't get me wrong. Rashawn Gary is very good at his sport, but he's not I would say he's a better athlete than football player. I wouldn't say that to his face, of course, but but I do think that just in terms of being a top 10 pick, I think that that's a little ambitious for them. I think right now he's just more of a raw athlete, and I think he's more of a project. He doesn't even really have a defined position, I would say. That's why this mock actually has him for DL, because they can't really decide if he's a defensive tackle or defensive end. And there was some even rumors about him playing linebacker. So I noticed that, pick 10, Denver Broncos, Drew Lock, that's also something I agree with. So I agree with Drew Lock. I disagree with Dwayne Haskins going 6 to the Giants.
Okay. Well, let's go kind of in segments of 5 or 10 for these next ones, because I feel like it's got to drop off at some point. But I mean, what stands out to you? You kind of mentioned a few of them that don't really belong. You pointed to Rashawn Gary being one of those. If you look at 11 through 20 in the consensus, who stands out as someone who doesn't really belong there, or who's someone higher than you anticipated? Just kind of your general thoughts on those kind of players.
Absolutely. I got to say that I actually really like. I'm looking through 11 through 20 of this mock. Bengals taking Devin Bush, could totally see that. Green Bay taking TJ Hawkinson, the tight end out of Iowa, could easily see that. Atlanta Falcons is taking Ed Oliver. I don't think the one surprise I get out of that, I don't think Ed Oliver is going to be available at pick 14. I could actually see the Atlanta Falcons trading up to get out of Ed Oliver, maybe with the Lions at 8. I think Ed Oliver is going to be a top 10 pick. I'm pretty surprised that he lasts to 14 here. This is a surprising pick. The Washington Redskins taking Marquise Brown, the receiver. I can see him going in the first round. Brown just had a leg injury that he's recovering from, and he's not going to be fully healthy, arguably for the first week of the regular season. But he was the best receiver in college football last year. He's just coming off the injury. I could see Marquise Brown being a scenario where he's the only receiver taken in round 1. And surprisingly, all the other mocks that I'm looking at, Michael, right now have Marquise Brown way too low. Sometimes, most of them not even in the first round. This one I actually think is a little too high. So I didn't expect to say that, because I've never seen a mock where he's as high as 15 to the Redskins. But hey, I could see it. They need receiver help, and Marquise Brown's a great player. I have Marquise Brown going to the Raiders at 27 in my mock right now. So just to give an idea. 16, the Panthers. They haven't taken Cleveland Farrell there. I think they're going to take Brian Burns if they go defensive end there. I love Tennessee's pick, Christian Wilkins at 19. I don't think Jonah Williams at 18 to the Vikings is going to happen. I think he's going to be taken much before 18, maybe in that 13 range. I do like the Steelers pick, Byron Murphy. That's something that I could easily see myself mocking in the end. The Steelers taking Murphy, the cornerback out of Washington there. He and Greedy Williams are vying for the top cornerback, the CB1 in this draft class, if you will.
So let's go a little bit through 21 through 30 and then just kind of do the same thing.
Now we're getting a lot of surprises here. Cody Ford, this consensus mock has him going to the Texans at 23. I think there's no way in heck that Cody Ford lasts that long to 23 to the Texans. They also have Greedy Williams going in this range, and I do kind of see that. I know a lot of LSU fans won't like that. I do see kind of Greedy Williams probably not going to be a top 20 pick in this draft. I know he had a great freshman year, but kind of declined as a sophomore. He's got a lot of potential. I have Greedy Williams going to either the Chiefs at 29 or the Raiders at 24. So kind of in that range, and he kind of seems to keep slipping as the process moves along forward. N'Keal Harry, receiver out of Arizona State, Baltimore Ravens at 22. I think that's way too high. I don't think Harry's going to be a first-round pick. Jeffrey Simmons, interesting guy here, Michael, at 21 to the Seahawks. Interesting guy because this guy was supposed to be a top 5 overall draft pick, I would say. I'll say top 8 to be safe, until he tore his ACL in the draft process. So now it's going to be a situation where you're trying to judge health versus value there. And he's going to obviously not be a top 5 pick anymore. But, how late will he slide until he's actually taken? I do think into the first round is probably right. I think 21 is a little too high for him. I know he has the top 5 talent, but I just don't really see that. Josh Jacobs, first running back. They have him taken to the Eagles. Hey, I don't hate it. I have Jacobs being picked right around this range, but yeah, I could easily see that happening. And Taylor Rapp to the Colts. That's a very surprising pick, as is Rock Ya-Sin, cornerback out of Temple. Great name, Rock Ya-Sin. And Taylor Rapp's also a great name too. But I actually don't have first-round grades on either of these players, and they have them going 26 and 27 to the Colts and Raiders respectively. I don't see either of them going in the first round. Jerry Tillery, that's a name that the audience needs to be familiar with because I think he's going to go much higher than 28 overall, and I think he's actually going to be a steal in this draft. He's one of my favorite players in this draft class. I think he's going to go much higher than 28. Lastly, Deontay Thompson and Ja'Kiah Polite, I don't see those guys as first-round picks. They have them going at 29 and 30. And Irv Smith, they have Irv Smith to the Patriots. That's another surprise there. Irv Smith is who I have the Saints taking with their first-round pick, Michael, and that is obviously it's 62 overall. So you can kind of see I obviously do not expect Irv Smith to go in the first round.
Wait, you said Saints first? You said the Saints first pick, right? Not the first round pick? I'm just making sure I heard that right. Yeah. Okay.
Right, because the Saints don't have a first round pick, and so their first pick is actually all the way at 62. This mock has Irv Smith going at 32 overall to the Patriots. Okay. So obviously a strong disagreement there. Now I will say I might be a little low on Irv Smith. I think that the Saints might have to trade up a little if they want the tight end out of Alabama. And I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, we just signed Jared Cook, but first of all, I'm pretty sure that based on what I've heard and read, I'm pretty sure that the Saints are pretty high on Irv Smith, and I don't think their tight end market has diminished much just because they signed Jared Cook. I don't think they're done at that position. And also, tight end something that it's one of the positions like cornerbacks that don't immediately transition to the NFL. It's just a tough transition. So I think Jared Cook's kind of the perfect guy to help groom a younger tight end like Irv Smith. So
I was going to ask you a question about him because you had talked about this last time we talked about Gronk. You had talked about him and Hernandez. I mean, do you see that as a situation where the Saints could be running two tight end sets or something like that, even if they do wind up having both of those guys on the roster?
Right. And, they would. Don't get me wrong. Irv Smith would definitely, if he's drafted by the Saints in this, let's say it's the second round, because I don't think the first is realistic for anybody. No offense to this mock draft. But if he's drafted by the Saints, he'll probably play about, I would say, 30 or 35% of the snaps as a rookie. I don't think he'll be a full-time player, but there will definitely be two tight end sets. And I think the logic of these analysts putting Irv Smith to the Patriots at 32 is that exact same reason that, Gronk just retired. I think that there's a lot of rumors out there that the Patriots are going to try to get one or two tight ends in this draft. I just don't think it's going to be Irv Smith that high at pick 32. It's an interesting exercise. I do love looking at other mock drafts and kind of just seeing where everyone has them, especially if you have 9 kind of respected analysts. Obviously, we have some strong disagreements with them, and but that'll be one of the challenges that I have. I mean, they're my competition, to be honest. I try to beat them every year in terms of accuracy. So to me, it kind of just makes me smile when I'm seeing mocks that I think are not very accurate. But I don't want to do too much smack talk because you just never know what's going to happen on draft day.
You got to wait to smack talk until it's done.
That's right. You just never know when I'm just going to have just a total duck and, I'm not going to be doing much smack talk. I can smack talk on the past, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, I'm definitely going to do better because we just have no idea. I hope that I do, though. But let's move on to the best question of the week. And that is by Matt from Covington. And Matt asks, I think this is a question for you, Michael. Matt asks, who do you think the NBA MVP is going to be this year? Michael, who you got?
I think it has to be Giannis. I know Harden has really had, so Harden's had the best scoring season since Kobe some time ago. But I mean, to me, I always value two-way players over one-way players, and Giannis has just been absolutely tremendous this year. So the Bucks are top 3 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, and he's by far the best player they have on both ends of the floor. There was actually, if you read all kinds of expert stuff, a lot of them even had him as Defensive Player of the Year. and the guy's averaging almost
Wow.
30 points a game. He's just tremendous. I mean, I think the best way that I saw it put, there's a guy named Kirk Goldsberry who wrote that basically that Giannis gives you on defense the traditional big and the shot blocking and the length, but he also gives you the perimeter mobility of someone smaller. And in today's NBA, I mean, that is an absolute, that is such a big deal, especially when you're playing someone who's a traditional big like Brook Lopez, who needs to stick close to the rim and really can't get out there. I mean, you're basically getting so much more with Giannis, and kudos to them for the season they've had. Budenholzer has done a great job with them, and he's been, to me, I always am going to value overall impact more so than just points. So that is a little bit of my bias towards things, and Harden's had a great year, but to me, Giannis is hands down the MVP this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, I tend to agree. I don't have any disagreements with pretty much anything you said, to be honest. I know that's lame. I wish I could combat with anything, but hey, Harden's always in the mix, and you could make an argument for him, but I just don't think it's a very good one. 27 points per game, 12 rebounds, 6 assists. I mean, he was shooting, it's just very efficient. I mean, 58% from the field. I mean, come on. This guy's been incredible, and obviously the Bucks have, a lot of people don't realize they have the best record in the NBA this year. And, I hate that whole, best player on the best team. I don't follow that. I hate that little saying, and that's not something I follow, but I do think he was genuinely probably the most valuable player this year, and that's really what the award is all about.
Yeah, and what makes him so cool, too, is that Giannis is a guy who, I can't remember who was putting this stat together, but getting unassisted dunks is extremely hard. And what makes Giannis so special is that Giannis is getting, I think he posted, it was a top 5 unassisted dunks, I think dating back to Shaq. And I think Shaq had 3 of the spots, and I think Dwight Howard had 1 of the spots. But so Giannis is getting to the rim, just dunking everything, and he's doing it by himself, but he's doing it from the perimeter a lot of the time. So, I mean, it's really like him driving, throwing his shoulder into someone, and because he's so long and because he has such huge hands, he can palm the ball really easily, so he's throwing his shoulder out at someone and basically just dunking right afterwards, and it's just unstoppable. I mean, the guy is just unreal, and like you're saying, I don't buy into the whole best player on the best team. I always think any of these arguments have to be nuanced, but I think if you're looking at this season, like you're saying, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind. If I had to draft a player for the regular season this year, based on what they did, I would draft Giannis in a heartbeat.
Michael, do you know when they pick the MVP? And do you think that the playoffs will have an impact on the voting, or is this strictly a regular season award?
It's supposed to be just a regular season award. I actually can't remember the exact date they pick it, but I think it's supposed to be entirely isolated towards the regular season. So they don't announce it for a good while, I think, but it is a regular season award. So, hopefully
right,
that's something I know.
Yeah, when you have those voters, I mean, you're going to have recency bias there. So, I mean, I think the only way that Harden really has a chance here, actually, is if he were to somehow beat the Warriors in round 2, because they play early. So they're going to play before this award is voted on, I'm assuming. So I think that the only way Harden will win is if he can somehow take down, Goliath here. And, if he has a great series in that game, I could see Harden maybe getting, a lot of respect from the voters there. But if the season, if this were to be done before the playoffs, I think Giannis would win pretty handily.
Yeah, I think so. He should. That's my opinion. And look, to be fair to Harden, I feel bad for Harden because I think when Westbrook won that MVP a few years ago, I think Harden deserved it. And I think, Harden obviously got it last year, but I think it's something to where he should have had 2 MVPs.
A couple times.
Yeah, he deserved it 2 years ago or whatever it was when Westbrook won. I didn't think Westbrook deserved it that year personally, but, kudos to Harden for the season he's had. It's nothing against him, but I think Giannis is a clear-cut MVP this year.
And that'll wrap up this week's local episode number 8. If you like what you heard today, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can always follow us on Twitter at BestPodcastNola, and you can submit your questions and we will debate them on our Best Questions segment in each show. We'll be back next week talking NFL draft, going picks 1 through 32. Tell all your friends, who dat?